So, hello? Does anyone, we're opening the meeting. Does anyone want to speak at privilege of the floor?
Oh, here's another attendee
Okay,
iPad. I think that's Kel. Jean, I wanted to mention something if I could.
sure.
Okay. I was just looking, oops, I'm getting feedback or something.
Okay.
I was looking at the foundational statements that we did last week, and I just wanted to throw out there, just for what's been done so far, some of it's kind of between the lines maybe, but I just wanted to bring to the commission's attention maybe something that would be more intentional in a statement about a commitment to clustered or nodal development that's articulated in the comprehensive plan. You can read that into some of the statements, so I'll leave that to your thinking. That's all. You're muted, Jean.
I've been meeting occasionally in person and I've forgotten entirely how to meet on Zoom. It will come back. Now it's like, Should I had to run a meeting that was part in Zoom and part in person. I was like, I'm losing it.
Wow.
So, yeah, it wasn't fun at all. So we have the minutes of the June 8th meeting, and I know I need to correct who was there because I always seem to leave Evie off, so I will do that. And is there anything else? Hearing none, does someone want to move them?
I'll move that they be accepted.
Thank you, Evie.
And I will second.
Thanks, Ernie.
Yep.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, great. So the third thing on the agenda is the work session on the statement of purpose. And I know, and there's Mark, and no, you're not Mark, you're Tim.
Whoops. I'm Tim. Can I just quickly make a liaison report?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it actually probably won't make you happy because I think what we're about to do in the town is undergo a new transition into bipolar meetings, both in person and virtual. So the town board will be meeting at our first agenda meeting. I think at that meeting we'll be discussing procedures for opening town meetings to the public. It's almost entirely certain that we will continue to move forward bipolarly, since especially there are a couple of town board members, myself included, who will want to continue to work virtually for various reasons. And there could be commission members who would fall into that same category. But we're gonna have to, there's still many things we need to still finesse in terms of numbers of the public, how to do it, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So by the next, I can't remember when the next commission meeting is. It's probably after the 4th of July.
Yep.
I think by that time we should have probably a good game plan ready to go.
Great. Good. Yeah, I understand that the actual Mark Whitmer is going to be testing this system and will then become like the AV guy. Is that right?
I don't know about that, but yeah, we're practicing with it, and hopefully I think it works pretty well, but we've used it for meetings where Jesse and I and one board member were there. We didn't have the public in, but we're testing it out. And so yeah, we should have that ready to go. And yeah, I'll help you with that for sure when that
Great.
happens.
Okay, we're gonna postpone the planning committee report a little, and we're gonna go on to working on the statement of purpose. And hi, Nan, hi, Rick. And I'm gonna turn it over to you and hear how things are going.
Well, thanks. Good to virtually see everybody. At our last meeting, we got through about half of the statements. The only input I've had from anybody since the last meeting and today was an email that Ernie sent out yesterday, I think it was. So I guess the question for you all is, and Ernie, I think you sent that to everybody. So I guess the question is, do you want to go back and discuss his suggestions, or do you want to move on and then go back to him, or how would you like to proceed?
Ernie, I'm sorry, I didn't see your email, probably because I've been traveling. So would you tell me a little bit about it?
I just took the document and just made some quick edits, but I kind of went through the whole thing. I thought there were some clarifications and just better wordings of things. It's really not terribly consequential. I think we should probably just start where we left off and see if we can kind of get through that, and then go and revisit this again in a future meeting. I think that, you know, it's perfectly legitimate to look at these things again as we go forward.
Sure. Michelle?
Oh, I guess my question was, Ernie, I didn't see any changes in color. Like, did you indicate what your changes were in some way?
I was just looking at it, and I don't understand quite what happened. Some of the changes I thought I had made didn't make. Should show up as red. The changes I have made, and
Ernie, it shows up when I look at it. I just have to put it into review. You know, choose review at the top, you know, bar of the different
I see.
formats.
You had to turn on the review heading of the Microsoft Word.
I was just looking at it on my phone, so maybe it's different if I look at it on my computer. So I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to look at it.
Let's just ignore it for now, and then we can kind of go back to it later. It was, as much as anything, it was notes to myself.
That sounds like a great idea. And if there's things you want, we'll do that then. Bruce?
Yeah, I thought, and I liked what you did, Ernie. I kind of agreed with it. So the wording was, I think, a little bit cleaner to me. Seemed to make a little more sense.
Yeah, I would echo that too, Bruce, to Ernie. I think I sent a note back to you on that. I thought it cleaned it up quite nicely.
Great. Okay, so as we go forward with these, Ernie, if you have suggestions, please talk about them. And Nan, we'll start where we were, which I forget which letter it was.
I think we were on G, which is the promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities. I have that highlighted. So I think we had not quite come to a conclusion about that one. So everyone should be looking at the one that, yeah, Michelle?
Are you going to share your screen?
Oh, sorry. Let me
make sure that you can.
Yeah, let me,
Mark, if you're there, we need to make Nan a co-host.
Yeah, I'm taking care of that. I just, hang on a second. Let me.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay, here we go. I think you should have it now, Nan.
Okay, all right, let me try. Nope, it's still disabled.
Let me double check here. Whoops. It's, try it again. It's saying, mine's saying you are.
Oh, okay, now I am. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Does everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we were down on this one that's, what was that?
There's no way to make it larger, is it?
Oh,
Nick?
yes, yep, sorry. How's that?
Better, thank you.
Better.
Okay. So we're on this one, G. Promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities consistent with the rural, historical, and natural environment. And I'd have to go back to the earlier version. It was slightly different before, but this is kind of where we left it at the last time.
Okay. Ernie, did you have any suggestions for that? You're muted, Ernie.
Yeah. No, I thought this was I kind of didn't comment on this one. I thought this one could just say promote and preserve farming and agriculture activities consistent with how things are now. You know, I mean, basically, I guess rural, historical, and natural environment. It's just, yeah, I don't know how things become consistent with history, or consistent with, yeah, I don't know. This one's just is one of those vague statements that I guess I you know, it would be better if it got to the actual point. What are we really trying to preserve?
Well, it's really, what about if we added the word character in? Would be consistent with existing
Rural, historical, and rural character?
I guess existing. I mean, I think what we're trying to get at is keeping things of a similar scale, and techniques. I mean, we're not, right? I mean,
well, I think what this one is trying to say is that you want to, I mean, usually it's like when we talk about development being consistent with existing conditions, it's, you know, it's usually development is consistent. Now, so how I read this is promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities. I mean, are you afraid that too large of a farming operation would be inconsistent? Is that what you're trying to get at? This came
well,
from.
I guess it's a question of what you know. I mean, if we're creating a zoning ordinance to promote and preserve this thing, then it should be clear what this thing is. And so, you know, you know, consistent with existing rural. You know,
But is the real emphasis that you want to promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities, period?
I think that would be better.
Yeah,
We have rural character up in A.
Yeah, I mean, we address your rural character in another point altogether. So
Ernie,
yeah,
excuse me.
you know, promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities, period.
Yes, I agree.
right.
Yeah,
Bruce, you had your hand up.
Unless there's something in the comprehensive plan that you know was pointing to something more more specific than that. I don't know that we need to be any more specific than that. So
Does it help
I would.
if we think about what we don't want and how that would not be or be reflected in number G? Because if agricultural activities and farming practices morph in some areas into a mega farm, would that be consistent with this language? I'm just trying to think what would not look like it's consistent with this. Maybe that makes it easier to be specific.
But is zoning a legal tool for preventing large scale agriculture? I
No.
didn't understand that
No.
to be.
No, if you have you can control farms outside of a New York State agricultural district. But if you have, a farm inside of a New York State agricultural district, you would not be able to use zoning to say we don't want a mega farm. As long as they were conducting practices consistent with normal agricultural practices, which often include big farms, the zoning would not be able to address that.
Right. So just in the context of what we're doing here for zoning, it seems like the general value that we're trying to state is promote and preserve farming and agricultural activities, period.
Right.
Right. I believe that we address rural and historical in many places. I think we could just leave consistent with existing and natural environment.
You mean leave it in or take it out?
I think we could leave consistent with existing and the natural environment. We leave rural and historical out.
Oh,
I don't want to get into nuance here about agriculture and its relationship and harm or positive aspects for the natural environment, but agriculture is not the natural environment. Agriculture is a highly modified environment. So I'm not comfortable with claiming that agriculture is consistent with the natural environment. Furthermore, I'm not sure that that's really the value that we want to be promoting. There are places for the natural environment to be preserved as a natural environment, and there are places appropriately for agriculture and farming activities to be preserved, but the two are not the same.
But I believe they're talking about farming the way it's been done and keeping the natural environment the way it is and not disturbing any more. I don't know what's wrong with my volume here.
I gotta say, I tend to agree that it's simplifying this because it gets muddy after the word activities. And if we just stop it at activities, it's something that can be specified on if we come up with a brilliant idea at some point, but it gets muddy with those other words after it. It's like, what does that mean?
I agree with that.
I agree.
Thank you, Evie. Whoever is 714-258-0644, could you mute? Because I think we're getting feedback.
The host should be able to mute people.
Let me, so that's Mark. Mark, can you mute that?
Will do.
I was muted
No.
and it's still that way.
yeah. Keep in mind that, so we talked last time about the importance of the purpose statements, setting the direction and the foundation for all of the standards and whatever you're going to ultimately have in the zoning. So the purpose statements are not necessarily the regulations or prescriptive, but they describe what you ultimately want to accomplish by having a land use regulation. So we talk about, preserving scenic resources. E is talking about preserving and maintaining all of these natural resources. And the goals are not mutually, these purpose statements are not mutually exclusive. So, just keep that in mind, that these don't have to be, the details will come later in exactly how we're going to do that and what we're going to do. But, you know, the way this was originally written, kind of conveys that there's some sort of agricultural practice out there that you feel would not be consistent with the rural, historical, and natural environment. And, you know, I think going back to what Barb said, we have to be very careful about how we approach farming and not step on ag and markets law here. So that, I guess I tend to agree that the simpler, if your goal is to protect farms and promote farming and agricultural activities, then just say that as simply as you can.
Okay, so I'm hearing general agreement that we end this after activities. Does everyone want to nod if they are in agreement?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yeah, I just want to say, I have to go back to I don't not understand what the historical environment is. So I just think it's confusing, and we should just end it after activities.
Okay, anyone else? If you want to end it there, I will take your nod as affirmation, and that's what we'll do. Great.
Agree.
Okay, H.
Oh, I have two G's here. I see that.
Oh, okay. So G2.
G2, yeah. So this next one is, I forget where this one, remember that I pulled together these statements from your moratorium language and your site plan language. And I think, Ernie, you had a question about this one, about what is neighborhood preparedness?
Yeah, I just don't know what
and
that means.
I'm not sure if you're talking about like resilience to flooding or preparedness for natural disasters. You know, and certainly that doesn't necessarily go along with age-friendly community design principles. I mean, they're two very different kinds of things. So.
Right, and are either one of them pertinent to zoning?
Well, they could be, you know, it depends on ultimately what regulations you end up having. I mean, there are certainly community design principles that incorporate age-friendly and ADA compliant kinds of standards. Preparedness and resilience would be any number of floodplain, riparian zone, kind of, you know, protections to protect so people aren't building in the floodplain, or they're, you know, building, if, you know, that the building code for flood damage prevention are all preparedness. Now, I don't know if that's what was originally meant by preparedness and resilience. That's how I've interpreted it.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could say flooding, but you know, otherwise I don't know what preparedness, neighborhood preparedness refers to, and seems.
Is anyone serving on the board who wants to say something?
No, I had the same question.
This is Tim.
Seems like it's mixing too many things together that aren't necessarily associated. So, I mean, the idea of neighborhood preparedness and age-friendly community design principles just seem like they could be broken into two pieces separate, if those are parts we want to address. I mean, I like the idea, and I don't know how legally we can put in a zoning ordinance that flood prevention regulations. I mean, I would hope that we can do that in a zoning ordinance.
I mean, there's a stormwater management plan that already exists, and it's pretty stringent. I don't know how. I mean, zoning may identify where flood zones are, or perhaps enlarge the flood zone areas.
Could it regulate how close people build to a flood zone? Is that a relevant way?
Yeah, that's often, you know, some zoning laws definitely have flood related regulations. Overlay zones, setbacks, design criteria for how buildings are built in the flood zone.
Do we have any areas where flooding is a problem?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Very much so. On Route
Guys who live
79,
in the creek.
on Route 79, right near the town line. When I worked on the ambulance, that was always an issue when we had heavy rains.
The which town line?
The eastern end on 79,
Oh,
near
where we go.
Flatiron Road.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Huh.
Yeah, and the flood zone in maps show, certainly in Sladeville Springs itself, part of the flood map. Barbara?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if we could build into this statement on residential development a reflection of one of the goals from the comprehensive plan. And that goal says incentivize housing that is concentrated within designated focus areas. And then it says see the vision map in the appendix that's in the comprehensive plan. So I'm wondering if we could have a statement, something like promote residential development that addresses or that supports nodal or cluster development or highlights. You know, we don't want to limit it to cluster development, but promote residential development that that is concentrated within designated focus areas, which is kind of coming right out of the comprehensive plan. So promote residential development that is concentrated within designated focus areas, supports community resilience, age-friendly community design principles, and encourages cluster development, something along those lines.
Isn't concentrated.
Well, the only thing I would say about, I mean, I think that, you know, certainly some residential development could be clustered, but not all residential, you know, like even if you use the conservation subdivision technique, doesn't always result in a clustered subdivision. It might result in a strategically designed subdivision. So,
Right.
But I
Right,
think,
and
you know,
yeah,
certainly
and that's what I'm trying to get at. Not limited to cluster development, but you know, encourage that as one, you know, one element, but especially, you know, encouraging housing that is concentrated within designated focus areas as per the comprehensive plan.
Barbara,
So-
would that, I'm
So
sorry.
not to prevent housing elsewhere, but to encourage it in the designated focus areas.
Would that language could it incorporate concerns about flooding and proximity to bodies of water? Would you see that as being consistent with that language?
Or it might be clearer to have, instead of having a convoluted sentence, to have two sentences, to have a separate sentence to accomplish that.
Like you could say something like residential development should be attentive to flooding concerns or flood prone areas. Something like that as well.
well, I guess, you know, I think you're trying to accomplish a lot with this one sentence. So
Okay.
I think that let's go back just for a second. We have, because remember, residential development is kind of intertwined in how we are going to reach all of these. So we already have something, maintain and promote rural character. Well, how do we do that? Well, we do that by focusing residential development in the focus areas. Avoiding or minimizing adverse impacts to the natural environment and climate. Well, how do we do that? By having floodplain regulations, preserving significant scenic resources. How do we do that? By having conservation subdivisions that the scenic locations are identified as part of the planning process. So they're all interwoven. So I think you need to determine whether you want to make a more specific statement about residential development and the kind of pattern you're expecting, or whether it will be addressed as a tool to accomplish all of these other things. So I guess, is this repetitive, or is this you want to have as a separate purpose statement, making a case about the kind of residential development you're looking for?
So my response to that is, if you look at D, which is focused on businesses, that I suggest that we need a counterpart that is focused on residences. And whether that's one sentence, one item focused on residences, or two, we could debate that, but I think we need at least one that's related to residential development.
I like that idea. That
Right, I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like that. And I also, I think that as far as the floodplain and that thing go, that's all going to be addressed with soil and water and with our mapping, because you won't be able to build within so many feet of all that. That's all going to be addressed already in a lot of our laws. And also soil and water addresses it.
What about if you take the age-friendly community design principles off and end it with this same thing? Cited to integrate with the rural, residential, and agricultural nature of the town, or something similar, to make those two statements, one for commercial and one for residential.
I like that.
And I would also relocate that to the next one after D. I would make that E, that whole thing E, so it fits right in.
Okay.
So why don't you take a look at that as a whole and see how you like it?
I think you need an is before cited.
Oh, okay.
That flows better.
I like it, and it needs a period at the end. Okay. Okay, so I think now we're on to G. Oh no, we already did G. We're on to H.
No, actually, we already did H.
Oh, okay. We're on to I.
I.
Encourage site and
May I speak?
yes.
I had some questions about this. I was a little uncomfortable with the language that included design coordination, because it might appeal to some and not to others, and it began to suggest things that made me wonder what we were actually trying to do here. And I think I could probably answer that question, but the language made me uncomfortable. So I was trying to think out loud, what are we trying to say here? Traditions, meaning design traditions. If I were someone who was a great fan of modern architecture, would that say to me that I wouldn't be allowed to build a modern home in a properly sited location because it wouldn't be coordinating with adjacent parcels? Does that make sense?
can I say something?
And my question is this oriented to all development or to commercial development? So does this include residential, you know, does it, and I think from a zoning point of view, that has a very significant, the answer to that is very significant. And how, I wonder how different that is from this one then, if it's just commercial.
I think, Michelle, did you want to say something? Or was that Barbara? I couldn't tell.
I no, it was me. I wanted to say something. I just wanted to kind of agree with Evie. I want to say, I think it's very subjective. You know, what's attractive to me may not be attractive to you. And I just think we should stay away from subjective qualities like that. And, you know, the tradition of, if you want to look at it really, when we were the design traditions of the town of Caroline, there's really a lot of boring stuff there. I just don't think we want to try to restrict designs.
Can
Well,
I say something?
this is Barb. Just to jump in on this line, that actually I think that this is likely meant more for commercial facilities, not for residential. And this actually reflects some of the language that came out or is like the language that the Land Use and Economic Development Task Force was dealing with in the design guidelines or design standards rather for projects that would be required to go through site plan review. So not residential, but you know, these are the, you know, things that have to go through site plan review. And so the idea was to have design standards that would have some you know, some continuity and sense of character on commercial and business oriented, you know, truly business, not home-based business, but, you know, truly, you know, business buildings. So, you know, maybe if we move this up on, you know, near or under the one that was about local businesses, and then, you know, really talk about having, you know, designs that are consistent with the rural nature of the town or whatever the language was on that one.
Yeah, perhaps insert the word commercial.
This is this is Bruce.
Yeah.
I had a problem with it too, just like Evie, and I went back and forth with it, and I changed the word coordination to compatibility, but it pretty much meant the same thing. So I had a tough time with this too, because wasn't quite sure as to how we would do this or whether we should even consider doing this. And along with what Michelle said, there's so many different designs in this town, and what one person likes and another person likes is completely different. So we should maybe move it.
Yeah, but I agree that it's, I agree with what Barb said. You know, it's different for commercial development. What I'm talking about is I don't think we should make, you know, for how people design their homes, I think should be totally up to them and not something that we control with zoning.
I agree.
I also agree with the earlier point, though, to take out attractive. That really is, you know, kind of a non-measurable, very, yeah, just very, very subjective. But, you know, and you might make a note that on this one, we could go back and look at some of the specific language that had already been, you know, considered very carefully in leading to the design standards, and look at some of the preamble, you know, words that are associated with that.
So is D, so just comparing what you have that you already decided, D is talking about commercial local businesses, and well, this actually has new small and home-based businesses
Right.
in this sentence. But so architectural form is in here. I mean, from my perspective, this statement here is enough. If you wanted to have commercial design standards, that statement is enough background and foundation to show why you would want to have design standards. So I guess the question is, do you need this to articulate, you know, to
Yeah, do we need E or can we get rid of it?
I don't. Direction for commercial businesses in D, or do you need to go further.
As long as the notion of architectural form includes design elements, which I personally have understood them to be different. But if experts are saying that architectural form includes design, then I'm okay with it. Or we could take D and we could add in design traditions or, design elements, so, to integrate with the rural, residential, and agricultural
yeah.
nature. Yeah,
I mean, you could add it in there and then,
Get rid of E.
that's fine
Yeah.
with me.
Okay, that look good?
It just reads
can't-
funny. I mean,
Read plenty?
yeah,
see.
I mean, intensity, agricultural form and design elements, comma, I mean,
Yeah.
and how about,
Art.
how about
you
just
need-
design?
how about just architectural design elements, period? Then it encompasses form, color, everything, just architectural design.
That makes sense?
Sounds good.
And I think you need to insert R before cited.
Whoops.
Yeah. And
And so then-
I guess I also get the sense that in D, we're promoting local businesses and opportunities for small and home-based businesses. And the implication is that other types of businesses are not welcome, they aren't allowed. Do we need to include all businesses in D, or do we need to address those other kinds of businesses in some other fashion, such as E?
Yeah, I think that's a real distinction here that Ernie put his finger on. That D really started out as promoting local businesses, and with other words that go with it. Where E was any kind of commercial structure or development would need to have design elements and other aspects that are consistent with the rural character of the town. So I see them as being, the two statements have two different purposes.
I think that was a good point. Everyone now feel good about that?
Well, so we're going to reword. So we need to reword E to reflect the same things. I mean, I think I think the same adjectives apply that are
Yeah.
of such scale, intensity, architectural design, and they're cited to integrate with the rural. So do we just copy all of that and add that to the commercial site and building designs?
That's what it would look like if we did that.
Then I just think it's just like maybe we're talking about two different things. One is to promote local businesses and opportunities for new and small businesses, period. And then talk about, encouraging commercial site and building designs that have, right? Instead of qualifying
Yes.
sort of qualifying our promotion of local businesses and then separating out all the other ones.
I think it's, Ernie, I think
promote
you're on.
local businesses.
Yeah.
And then
Any
say
commercial.
all businesses have to, follow these other guidelines.
Right.
Right.
So like
Yes,
that.
I think that works. Does that work for everyone? Let me
Yes.
see if I can see everyone. Yes, nod wildly. Okay, good. Those of you I can see are nodding wildly. That sounds great. Okay.
Okay. So the next one, is promote and preserve, oh wait, we did that one. J, preserve and maintain prime and important agricultural soils in the town. Should that be added
like
to
it.
I? Or is that two separate things?
I think it's two separate things. What do
Yeah,
other people think?
two separate things, because I think that, you know, I mean, we may have overlays that
Right,
for soils,
right.
and, you know, which would be different than farming and agricultural activities.
Yep.
um,
So anyone else? Wish I could see you all at one time, but I can't, so I have to look through. But everyone looks okay with that. We're leaving those two. Fabulous. We're moving on to K.
Yeah, I think this is, you know, you're kind of, do something about climate change.
Yep.
Type of statement.
Yep. I like it. It's simple. Does that capture what people want to say? I see Barbara smiling.
Yeah, I'm not
I see
sure that they should
Michelle.
be the same, but it sounds okay, but I'm not real positive about and promote adaptive reuse of buildings. That would be, I guess, all right. Sounds okay. Support sustainability.
Yeah, I think what it would mean is something like, and this, we've already seen this happen in the town. You've taken a barn and made it into apartments, right?
Right.
You've taken a church, I don't know if that's happened in Caroline, but taken a church and made it into a home. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, good. Okay, then I think we are on to L. Promote accessibility for all and enhance pedestrian access, particularly in hamlets.
I was gonna just add bicycles to that because that's my thing, but you know, no
I think
mention
that's
of.
not a bad idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. The comprehensive plan calls out specifically pedestrian ways and bikeways, you know, uses that language. So yes, I agree with that.
Do you want to change access to ways? Pedestrian way and say that, or?
Let's get rid, there's got to be a better word than access.
Yeah, access just means you can get there. It doesn't mean there's a path through it. So
You could use pedestrian ways and bikeways.
Yeah.
Bikeways being one word.
Yeah.
As in the comprehensive plan.
yeah, I like that.
Oh, and there's other language that instead of just pedestrian ways, it's pedestrian walkways. That might be better. Pedestrian walkways and bikeways.
But a
Could you
pedestrian is a walker.
Could you just say pedestrian bikeways, like compatibility? I'm not sure if you need for all in there either.
Any other changes to this one?
I just don't want to be quibbly about it, but pedestrian means a person walking. So it seems like it's a redundant thing to say a pedestrian walkway.
Oh, so just take out pedestrian?
No, take out walk. One or the
Pedestrian
other.
ways.
Yeah, either is fine. The comprehensive plan talks about pedestrian ways as well as pedestrian walkways. So whatever you prefer, Evie,
Okay.
is fine.
That sounds good. Okay. So M says historical ellipsis.
Yeah, I think when we first started last time, someone said we hadn't mentioned historical resources, so we added that as a note to come back to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I looked over the comprehensive plan and it makes no mention of history anywhere, really.
Hmm.
So I don't know whether that's just because nobody thought about it or it just, got dropped off the face of the planet. And I don't know that zoning necessarily can address that. Or even, I mean, maybe in site plan review somewhere. I don't know. We have, we really don't have, I don't know if there are any buildings in the town that are on the National Register even. It's just, we got a few placards up here and there, but
Bridges might be.
No, there are a couple of buildings on the National Registry, such as the town hall.
Yeah, the town
And I
hall.
believe one of the churches.
So with that in mind, again, trying to draw from the language of the comprehensive plan for consistency, a simple statement like preserving designated historic buildings. I would suggest that, preserve designated historic buildings and stay away from history as a culture that we're trying to maintain or preserve. I think that's really problematic.
and
I-
sites. I would.
Yeah, I think maybe we should add sites there or leave buildings out and just say historical sites, because there are many historical signs in Caroline that are sites.
Right. How's that? Does that do what people want?
Would that include the buildings, I would think?
I would say
It would
building.
include buildings, the
I would
historic
include
buildings.
buildings in there.
Do you want to go back to buildings
And we have both.
or both?
We can have, let's have both.
Yeah, I
Both,
would think we should have both.
okay. Okay. Is there anything else people think we need to add that hasn't been mentioned? This isn't your last chance, but if there's anything now. That's terrific. So Nan, do we need to do something about severability? You just want to look at
No,
this?
that's just kind of common language that's in every single zoning law, and it basically says that if this ever went to court and one section was found to be invalid, that it doesn't invalidate the entire zoning law. So this is just a normal part of what goes into the legalese part of the zoning law.
Okay, great. So then we will give ourselves a small round of applause. And
Can I
and
ask
move
a
on.
question? Can I ask a question before we leave? I'm not sure. Jean, can you see me? I don't know, since the paper, anyway. Just a question. I'm not sure where does air quality fit in? Does it fit in?
We have,
Oh yeah, we do.
yeah,
Okay.
right here.
Yep. Okay, good. Thanks.
Sometimes I can see you, Edie, and sometimes not. I can only see 5 people at a time when something's up, when there's a document. So on our agenda next, Nan was going to talk about, we're going to talk about hamlets and their borders and what are distinguishing characteristics of those. So let's talk about that. I think very early on, before Nan came, we talked a little bit about hamlets and where they were and what was I can't remember the word that we were using.
The
And
focus
a
areas.
viable hamlet versus a non-viable hamlet. And I asked the question, what are the borders of the hamlets? Because there are signs in places that says the hamlet of Brookendale and the hamlet of Sladerdale Springs. but I wasn't sure how one determines what that borders are. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about that. And I know that Nan mentioned that when you drove around with Rick, that you saw the hamlets as being very distinct from each other. So I just wanted to have a small conversation about that. And what are people thinking about hamlets, and how are hamlets different from other places in the town? And so clearly they're different because houses are closer, they're more of walkable communities. Many of them have some community building, like a church or a community hall or a store, that sort of thing. What else do people want to say about hamlets as we begin to think about them?
That's a
No one
tough
wants to.
question.
It's tough. Yeah, I mean, people seem to, and it's my completely, I may be totally off base on this, but it seems to be a bit of an isolated dwelling practice, because if you live in one hamlet, your practices and activities, not to say that you wouldn't be biking all over like Ernie does, but that they are not very well connected, and so I'm not sure how you approach that from a zoning thinking perspective, other than to just be very inclusive.
Well, I guess from a zoning perspective, I would encourage you to think about, are the hamlets different than other places in town? Because the zoning can treat them differently. So the question would be, are there areas in town that we call hamlets different than, say somewhere else? So, is Slaterville Springs or Caroline Center, any of these hamlets identified here different than right here? And if so, how do you want to treat them differently, and why? So it goes back to Jean's question about what makes a hamlet different than any other place. And are those things important to you to perpetuate in the future as development goes on?
And I think the answer would be yes, they are different. The comprehensive plan treats them differently. It gets back to that, the notion of focal areas or nodal areas, or areas in which to encourage particularly commercial development, in the hamlets. And part of the reason for that, rather than encouraging commercial development where you put your arrow there on the middle of no hamlets, is to keep areas that have that have open space, that have agricultural amenities, that have the natural environment. It's all these other values that have been expressed in other bullets of that statement we were working on. So the idea has been, in many conversations of many groups, including the comprehensive plan, is to try to encourage commercial development, non-home-based business development in the hamlets. And then, in terms of residential development, to look at, those areas that were in the, the designated focus areas, and see how those overlap with the hamlets. But residential development was not encouraged only for the hamlets, but commercial development was certainly encouraged mainly in the hamlets.
But the hamlets in this case are Slaterville Springs, Speedsville, and Brooktondale, right?
The hamlets that we talked of as viable
You don't want to
hamlets.
be encouraging development, commercial development in Whitechurch, for instance.
Right, yeah.
So I think that's the first question, is are we going to move forward with the assumption that there are three hamlets?
What about Speedsville?
I think
Well, that's it.
Speedsville counts as,
Speedsville, Slaterville, Springs, Brooktondale, 3 hamlets. I mean, I don't think Caroline Center, I don't think Beesmer, I don't think they, there's not enough critical mass there to say that, you know, we should be concentrating more development there.
Mhm.
How would commercial development be a negative if it was restricted to a hamlet? Well, I'll just leave that question as is.
So ask
Not-
that again.
How would, I'm thinking about commercial development, if restricted to one of the 3 hamlets, would any commercial development that we could envision, if we are selectively saying that our zoning ordinance would restrict or not want development anywhere but in a hamlet, can you think of circumstances where that would not be consistent with the other ways that we have talked about residential and home business and preservation in the hamlets?
I think yes. I mean, we certainly see home businesses, including things like auto shops, occurring not in the hamlets, in other places. And we also have commercial development sometimes near a hamlet. For instance, Brooktondale, you know, the stuff that happens like on the corner of Midline Road. I'm not sure I would consider that to be in the hamlet of Brooktondale, but that's a fair amount of commercial development now. Or Carson's, you know, coal yard, et cetera, which is on 79, is not in the hamlet. So I think there has to be commercial development that happens outside of the hamlets and is likely to happen outside of the hamlets.
Yeah,
What else people think?
I agree with what Ernie said as far as, you know, the hamlets, but then what we also have to take into consideration is Route 79 is the main commercial corridor for our area, and there is quite a bit of commercial business already. There's some on Beesmer, below Beesmer, right on the line, as far as Crispell's, and then, you know, storage units and rental all the way up through 79. So Route 79 is the major commercial corridor for our area.
Kim?
But if you designate hamlets and you develop, say, a use table that says what's allowed in the hamlet and what's not, and you know, just because you allow for a variety of businesses in the hamlet doesn't mean that you can't allow for other types of businesses on Route 79. So there might be a business that is more appropriate to be on a larger lot in, you know, along Route 79 that would be better served somewhere else other than the hamlet. I think the key, I guess, what from a zoning and a rural planning perspective is, you know, I think your comprehensive plan called for not wanting a strip development along 79 from one end to the other. So we have to be very careful about how we deal with business development along 79. But I think the question to ask is, in a zoning law, if you had hamlet districts set up that had certain development standards for residential lot size or whatever they may be, different kinds of uses, to focus the kind of development that we typically see in hamlets and villages. Is that how you interpret what your comprehensive plan is calling for? I mean, so that let's not worry about Route 79 just yet. Let's start simple and say, our hamlet, should the zoning treat hamlet different from other places? I mean, that's like a basic, to set up our starting of our district. That's the basic question. And then what are those hamlets? And then what are the boundaries of those hamlets? And then Rick can talk about how we go about defining the boundaries. But why don't you go back and confirm, yes or no, that you want to treat hamlets in a different way from other places because they look and feel and function differently.
Tim, I think you had your hand up before. Do you have something you want to say?
I'm going to pass because it was regarding Route 79, so I appreciate Nan's suggestion
Okay.
away from that.
Good. Anyone else?
I-
But
I-
I think, go ahead, is that Ernie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any specific reason to have hamlets. I mean, they exist, but you know, our zoning laws do not necessarily require that we recognize them as hamlets. I mean, we can call an area, you know, high density, you know,
Mhm.
whatever, or however we want to, without, you know, kind of complicating things by where do you draw the line for the hamlet, and whether the hamlet is going to have special rules and regulations that won't apply other places.
But
So
that's
I'm
the foundation of what zoning is. I mean, so that's what we're trying to get you to think about, whether there are some characteristics in those hamlet areas that you would like to expand on, promote, protect, or, you know, somehow
Yeah,
treat
but I
differently.
mean, they could also just be a commercial district. I mean,
I
that
mean, you
would
can
be-
call it whatever you want. You don't have to call it a hamlet. You can call it Speedsville, or you could call it, you know, Brookendale. You don't have to call it a hamlet, but I guess are there areas of the town that need to be treated as a separate development pattern than other places?
Barbara?
Yes. So yes, I think there are areas of the town that should be treated as separate development patterns. Areas that have concentrations of activity, business activity, community-based activities, where, for example, sidewalks would be appropriate, you know, as pedestrian walkways. You know, you wouldn't put sidewalks along every single rural road in the town, but you would want to have well-maintained sidewalks in areas where there's a lot of human activity, whether that's, you know, human activity, you know, going from, you know, shop to shop, business to business, or, you know, commercial venture to commercial venture. So yes, I think there are some ways of defining the kind of activity that are in these, you know, kind of, you know, nodes of activity, you know, nodes of human activity, and the amenities that you want to go with that are different from the lack of amenities in areas where there are not concentrations of people using whatever it is in that area. But I also want to be very clear that the comprehensive plan does not want to do anything to jeopardize home-based businesses. And that's been very clear, not only in the comprehensive plan, but in the Land Use and Economic Development Task Force. So I think we need to be clear here and not imply that home-based businesses can only be located in hamlets. That's not at all what has been intended in any of these conversations.
Okay.
That's
Go ahead. Is that,
that's kind of what I was wondering what we were doing here. Are we trying to avoid commercial development in the hamlets? And
No.
if so, then why are we avoiding Route 79?
We're not trying to avoid commercial development in hamlets.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to imply that we wouldn't have commercial development on Route 79. I'm just saying that that's a separate topic than the hamlet.
I don't know why it's separate.
well, because only part of
Commercial
79
corridor.
is in a hamlet, and we were discussing hamlets. That was the point of this. So we're only discussing hamlets at the moment. Evie?
I want to go back to what Ernie was saying, because I think it may be constructive to think about how we manage the hamlets, not as defining them as hamlets, but think about cluster development, focal areas, think about them that way, which would be pretty much an umbrella, I think, in terms of how we designate how much density is too much, what density might look like, what kind of density, rather than looking for perimeters, which will be very difficult to identify if we need to name those places. And I think people would be probably pretty upset if their areas got lost, Speedsville, Slaterville, Brooktondale. But I think there's another way to do it rather than try to stipulate the hamlets with borders and perimeters. I think that's going to be extremely challenging.
Okay, I am going to suggest that we all think about this, because I think it's a topic that's going to take a while and we're not going to settle this evening. But I love the fact that Nan talked about, is there a specific reason to treat areas differently? And should there be separate rules and regulations for certain areas, and what should those be? So that gives me a way of thinking about this, and I think all of us a way to think about it when we take this sort of topic up again about how do we draw districts in general. And this question about hamlets and other areas that are similar, or that you want to have the same kind of activities in, we'll take up. But I want to give Rick and Nan time to talk about mapping, which is the next thing on our agenda. So, that's okay. Shall we move to that?
Let me stop sharing this here. Rick, you want to talk a little bit about some of the mapping that we've been talking about, or where you're going with it?
Sure. So I guess there's sort of two approaches for mapping, and we've touched on it before. One of them is defining, individual districts, which gets back to this whole with the hamlet discussion. For instance, even if we're not going to say it's a hamlet zone and define it as a hamlet per se, if you wanted to treat those areas separately, then we need to define borders, and those borders, would be based on a combination of things, both natural and artificial, if you will. Generally, if we're going to draw zoning boundaries, we prefer to follow either existing parcel lines or existing natural features. We don't like to split parcels in half, for instance, unless there's a compelling reason to do so. For instance, if there's a stream or a river running through the middle of a parcel, and it makes sense to have one side of that stream zone one way and one side of the other, then yes, it makes sense to split that parcel zoning wise. But otherwise, if you've got like a large farm parcel, you don't want to necessarily have 2/3 of it in one district and 1/3 of it in another district, because it can cause confusion and complications. So that's sort of the artificial, if you will, boundary lines is following what people have already established with their parcel lines. But otherwise, like I said, natural features, roads, from this road to this road is this district, that sort of thing. Another thing which unfortunately does sometimes split parcels, but buffers, like for instance, if you wanted to have a corridor along Route 79, you could say within X feet of the center line of Route 79 is going to be zoned whatever. But then the other thing that Nan and I have talked about a lot, which probably lends itself well to sort of everything we've been talking about and just the makeup of Caroline, is the idea of potentially using overlay districts. So you may have, not to come back to it, but you may have something around the hamlets. Maybe they're not called hamlet districts, but higher density focused development areas, whatever you want to call it, that encompass maybe a few of the hamlets and possibly some other areas that aren't currently hamlets. And then the rest of the town is sort of a uniform zoning district. But then you have overlays for certain types of things. Like, for instance, we talked about flooding. You might have a flood sensitive overlay, which would include obviously the flood zone, but presumably more than that, like the riparian corridors, which thankfully we don't have to decide what those are. New York State Natural Heritage Program a year or two ago actually drew riparian buffers for the entire state, so we can use that as a starting point. And those extend beyond the traditional floodplain boundaries. So that's an obvious possible overlay that we can use. You could have an agricultural overlay, which could be soil-based. It could be, based on, existing agricultural lands, things like that. You could have, a forest overlay, if that was, something you want to look at. You could have, natural heritage. Again, they've done modeling for rare species and areas that they don't know for sure have rare species, but are have the characteristics to support rare species, and so you could use that as an overlay. Habitat protection, something like that. And so those are all, like I said, so you could have sort of a base. You could have your base zoning for most of the town. You could have maybe more intense development districts that are defined by natural features and or parcel lines. And then you could have these overlay districts, which would cover both of those things, and have special requirements based on what you want to protect using those overlays.
So we can use the mapping. One of the things that is a tool to help you think through these things is we can use the GIS on the computer to map all of those areas, so you can see where they are and manipulate the size or the parameters that go into it, so you can see what the effect of the different policies that you might establish in the zoning would be. So we're ready to, we can provide you with those maps and in the tool, but I think looking at and the reason we did the purpose statements first is that the next question to ask in the zoning is, how do we accomplish those purpose statements that you just drafted? So what are the tools that you want to put in place to meet those goals? And so the question about what you want to have happen, where you want to have it happen, and how are the next basic steps of the development of the zoning. So before we get into, a lot of other great detail, the question about these zones, whether you want one zone, you want several zones, you want hamlet zones, you want overlay, somehow understanding what's going on in town and thinking about how they all work together in terms of the zoning is really the next phase for you to really get down on paper, so we can then all of the other answers flow well. What do you want in this area, or how are we going to treat this area different than another area if you choose that way?
So to that end, I think we need a little education here. I think that there's a lot of terms that are being kind of tossed out here, and we're I think, I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm wallowing a little bit in too many choices. So I think that in some ways it would be good to kind of step back and then kind of say, okay, so the next thing we're doing now is we're kind of trying to decide, is there one zone or are there 10 and and what is going to be allowed in normally in those particular zones. And so I guess that looking at a zoning ordinance that would be not unlike something that we would do here, so which we've started to do, but then starting to think about how zones that the town of Danby uses or whatever, how they would apply to our own community, and where would we start to draw those lines. And I think that we kind of all have to kind of cogitate on that a bit, and think it through before we can really start to give you much direction.
I mean, would it help if, and Rick, I don't want to step on your toes and offer something that can't be offered, but would it help if we, because you have maps in your comprehensive plan that show various resources. So at the very least, those should be pulled out and looked at, because they already identify specific things in your town. But so I guess instead of me jumping in, I'll turn it back to Rick and say, what tools can we, either in addition to or somehow using the maps of known resources, what can we offer everybody to start thinking about what's going on in town that we might need to address in the zoning to meet those purposes?
I don't know that we need maps. I mean, I think we're all pretty familiar with the town and just kind of, where things are and what it kind of looks like. I think we need more of a sense of what types of zoning districts, there are. It's like, okay, we have, an agricultural zone, there's a rural residential zone, there's a medium residential zone, there's a high density residential zones, and some of these things are probably not anything we want or need. But if we had kind of a smorgasbord of things to choose from, it might allow us to focus a little bit better.
I mean, we can offer you a smorgasbord, or we can offer you some recommendations to start on.
Yeah.
From our experiences and our knowledge of the town and of zoning and what works and what doesn't work, we could give you a starting point.
That would really be helpful. A shop.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Let me suggest that you think it would be helpful too? Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I would need, like, to define it, to define individual districts. I would need to know, like, how restrictive that is. And also, just listening to what Ernie, or what he said, overlay district sounds pretty interesting. Sounds like something I would think that might work for us, but I need to know, I guess, a little bit more of exactly how each one of these things is defined. Like an individual district, is that just restricted to just this particular use? And can that change if you put an overlay on that? That type of thing. It's more definition to me, so I understand exactly what we're talking about.
Okay. I think what would be very helpful is, I think, three things. One, I'd love to have us all in one room together, if that were possible. Second, I'd like to be able to look at maps together, because I think some of us, I mean, I have a very good idea of the part of the town south of Route 79, but the part north of 79 is still pretty blurry to me, even though I've lived here forever. And third, I think we really need a working session that's longer than 2 hours. So what I'd like to do is work with Nan and maybe anybody else on the committee who wants to sort of try to map out the next 3 or 4 meetings and see if we can try to schedule at some time a working session, which I know Nan had thought would be a good idea. Does that make sense? Dan, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think there's different approaches to this. I think that you can, you know, I don't want to, I know when I interviewed, my perspective on moving through these steps are sometimes it's easier for you to react to something and say, this is not good, this does not fit us. Or, hey,
Right.
yeah, that captured pretty much what we were talking about. My
Yep.
approach is generally to use our expertise to offer you something that we have interpreted and heard you say, and then you tear it apart from there. You could say we love it or we don't love it. I'm afraid that, and I'm not saying you shouldn't look at the maps, you absolutely should, but I think it's going to still come down to you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what the resources are that you have, and work with, you know, start with what those tools are. As Bruce said, with every district or everything you have in there would have to be defined. You know, so I guess one approach would be you can, Rick and I can get you a couple options for you to think about and formulate your opinions whether it works or doesn't work. Or, you know, if you want to attempt that on your own and pour over the maps and come back to us with that direction, you know, that's okay too.
I think I saw a lot of people saying they'd like to have something to react to. Is that, please nod at me if I'm correct. I see Michelle nodding.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in and do something more than nodding. I think
Okay.
I think given the lack of detailed expertise and definitional knowledge among this commission, you know, one of the reasons we have you as consultants is to help us learn that. So I would suggest an approach of you know, just to get conversation going, of kind of the ends of the spectrum examples. You know, what would it be to have a town, and here I'm going to plead ignorance, but you know, like what would be the simplest end of the spectrum? So is it a town with one zone versus a very complicated rural zoning structure? You know, what would that entail, and what are the implications of it? You know, what are the pros and cons, so that we can at least get some sense of what, you know, what the endpoints are and what the implications of having a very easy, you know, laissez-faire approach to a very prescribed approach, you know, and then let's talk about it. The other point I want to make, though, that personally it would be helpful to me, and I don't know how hard this would be, but it would be very helpful to me to have, if it's possible, a single map, you know, like one interactive map with all of the, I don't know, dozen or so that have been portrayed in the comprehensive plan, and put that all on one map of the town, so that we have a map that shows all of these different things. I mean, I'm more familiar with certain elements of the town, whether it's geographical, locational, or, you know, natural, than I am of other parts of the town. And so I would really like to have, you know, a layered map that we can look at all of the resources. Where are the natural areas? Where are the agricultural areas? Where are the hamlets in relation to those? Where are the comprehensive plans suggested zonal, nodal or whatever zonal developments, you know, for, you know, focus areas, you know, all of that. There's the comprehensive plan was, you know, a multi-year effort that pulled together a heck of a lot of information, and to have that visually to guide our thinking as we think about these two ends of the spectrums, and what those might imply, you know, as terms in terms of limitations or what's allowed, and then we can really begin, I think, you know, getting into the meat of the matter.
Thank you, Barbara. Go ahead, Ernie.
Well, Tim's had his hand up forever, but he's on mute.
Okay.
So,
Ernie, go ahead and then I'll have Tim.
okay. So I guess that one of the questions I have is, is how site plan review is going to get rolled into all of this, because, one approach to all of this would be just to say, okay, the entire town is zoned agricultural. You can do anything agriculture you want to. Anything else you want to do, you got to get a special permit. You got to go through site plan review.
Oh, kill me now. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, but that would be, it would definitely, allow the maximum amount of control over how the town develops. But so in any event, I think that where site plan review comes in and how site plan review is going to dovetail with the rest of the ordinances is something that we need to kind of understand early on as well. Because I think that, so much of what you do with designating a zone is you're saying, this is what's allowed. Anything else, you got to go to site plan review.
Well, except that right now, the way you have your site plan law, it only covers a certain slice of development. So it's really only one small piece of what zoning could do. It's really only addressing commercial development over a certain size. And so that
Right.
leaves an awful lot of other things unanswered.
Yeah. I mean,
So then-
I,
That come into play to cover those other things that are not associated with site plan.
Tim, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One, I just might mention, which a lot of you are aware of, is that the task force this fall put a lot of time into refining site plan law and process. So my hunch is that a lot of that work you'll find is done and almost shovel ready with some tweaking. And I think the town board will be talking about actually whether we want to do some of that tweaking in advance or not. But I just want to say that when Mark and Jean and I were interviewing planners, one of the things that impressed us about Nan's proposal was a very systematic approach to working with the zoning commission, based upon her experience in terms of presenting tentative proposals up front to get feedback, which then, from my understanding of the process, works as an educational device to help us better understand all of these ramifications. So I think I would just encourage the commission to rely quite heavily at this stage on Nan's experience and expertise, because I think that we will find that this educational process that everyone's seeking will happen rapidly along the way.
Thank you. Let me just check and see if I see anyone else's hand. I don't. I do. I see Mark's.
Okay. Thanks, Jean. I'm just going to mention, I don't know if I heard right, but a process question or issue is that the zoning commission is a public body and it's subject to open meetings law. So if 4 or more of you meet, that is a public meeting that would need to be publicly announced, and the public would need to be able to attend that meeting. So.
Thank you.
Sure.
In fact, so what my suggestion had been was that I speak to Nan, and if anyone else wanted to join me in that, let me know. We won't have more than 4 of us do that, but to try to outline the next few meetings so that we all know where we're headed. I think that would be very useful. And I think I also have on the agenda next to talk about is quorum and summer meetings and where we are. So there are 7 voting members of the commission. And I don't think there's any reason for us to meet if we can't have at least 4 of us there, because it just seems silly. So that's what I would consider a quorum. Our real vote comes towards the end of this. I mean, we'll have to vote as we go along to push things together. But our real vote as a commission will be to decide whether or not we're passing what we have done along to the town board. So that's sort of where it comes in. But we will certainly vote on, I think we did the last bits as consensus, and we probably will try to do that as we move along, but there may be some things we have to vote on. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 8th of July, and I would like to try to make that be in person for those of us who feel comfortable to do that. So I feel comfortable to do that. How many of the rest of you would be willing to be at the town hall in person? I see Evie's hand up and Michelle's hand up. And
Ernie?
I see Ernie's hand up.
I will be
and
out of town, but I will
well,
try
then
to
you
get
can't
there.
be there in person.
Right.
And we'll find out from Val. So we'll set that up so that this is a two-pronged meeting. Some of you will be on Zoom, and some of us will be there in the hall. And we invite the public to come if they can. Is that right, Mark? Can the public come to that now, or do they come by Zoom?
That's our plan, to have that in place by that date. So that's our plan. Yes.
When we put out the notice to that, we'll make sure that we include that. And
So that would be July 8th?
That would be July 8th.
Okay. Somehow I
So
had.
that's, so that's a Thursday night. So are we
Oh,
shifting?
I'm sorry. No, I mean July 6th. I just had the wrong calendar in my head.
Oh,
That's-
I thought it was July 3rd. I had July 13th down, but that might have been.
I have to look at a calendar. I
Oh,
don't know where
July
I-
6th is a town board meeting, so it can't be on July 6th.
You're right. So it's the
I had July 13th as a zoning commission meeting.
You're right. It's the second Tuesday in July, which is the 13th.
okay.
I don't know why I thought the 6th could be a second Tuesday, because it cannot. It is not physically possible. So, okay, so the 13th of July, we will be there. And that sounds good. And is there anything else?
Well,
I may possibly, go ahead, Nan.
No, I think we can certainly chart out the next few meetings, but I think what Tim said was just my experiences of working with zoning commissions is I think that if you were all comfortable with letting Rick and I put together that spectrum, and I like, Barb, how you put it on, like from the easiest to the most complex, so you could see
Yep.
the options and what it looks like. And there's no sense of ownership or that has to be the way it turns out, but it's really a much easier starting place than just spreading out a map and say, what should our zoning district be? I don't want to take away any sense of ownership or decision making, but it just, from my experiences, has been an easier approach.
Thank you. So we'll work on that. Was that Tim? Who was that? No, I thought I heard a voice. Nope, okay. So I will be in touch with you, Nan, by email about setting up a time where we can talk and look at that schedule. And I actually think we accomplished a few things tonight. So just I want to review that we have finished the principles, which I think is terrific. Nan will get those back to us as a document, and we will all engrave them upon our hearts and memorize them, and move forward with those in mind. And we will look at the types of zoning there are. I think when we reviewed Danby's and then we reviewed Ulysses, I saw two very different structures. Danby's is pretty restrictive and very, I don't know, there's just a whole lot of things, and Ulysses was much more open. And so that I think was helpful. Mark?
I just wanted to ask for somebody who was on the meeting tonight chatted me about whether sort of the process for if they have input to the statements that you all were creating tonight.
There will be, sure. Well, there'll be open meetings and we'll have those posted, but I think if anybody sees them, we'll have them up on the town board. The
But
town,
can they provide input like at the next meeting for your consideration, or how would that work?
they certainly could. They could do it at the beginning of the meeting when we have, you know, the ability for people to speak. And they could also just send us something that we could think about. So either of those ways can work. And we will have an open meeting, and I don't know yet when we're going to have that first meeting for the public. And I think that sort of depends. At this point, I think we would all be like knocking each other over in the dark. We want to have something that we can present to people that they can, again, react to as we hope to react to things. So, but I would assume it will happen before September or sometime in September.
Mhm.
I would assume that we will be along that by that time. Bruce?
I
See your
think
hand
what, I think Mark probably is referring that he probably has some people who wanted to remark to the purposes.
Yes.
Is that correct,
That,
Mark?
they can, yeah,
Yeah,
they can certainly
that's
do
correct.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Will Lawrence was involved in sort of neighborhood resilience and age-friendly communities stuff. So I think she had some feedback on that she wanted to provide. And
Yes,
that's right.
absolutely.
That's correct.
Either
Will
send
there
me
be
something
people-
by mail or go ahead, Bruce.
I thought, we talked before about could people say something at our meetings or no?
You can speak at the beginning, and if somebody raises their hand and wants to say something, I'm fine with that, or if everyone else is. I don't want the meeting
Okay.
to be taken over, but if somebody has a
Right.
short comment, I'm okay with that. Are you all okay with that?
I understand. Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Great.
Great.
Thank
I don't, you know, it's particularly when we're working in these so difficult electronic times, because I actually think all of you are two-dimensional. Except for myself, because I know I'm three-dimensional. So. Oh, Tim Murray is showing us that he's three-dimensional right now. Sometimes I'm actually operate in the fourth dimension when I'm playing ukulele. So, so there you go. Anyway, I think that's all we have for this evening. Let me just check my agenda and see if I'm leaving anything off. Al could not be here. Is anyone who's on the planning committee currently have anything they want to add? I think that would probably be Barb, because I think Michelle wasn't at the last meeting.
Yeah, just to be clear, none of us are attending the planning board meetings, but we do receive the reporting out of those meetings and the agenda. So I'll just comment again that the planning board is working very hard on drafting a Caroline battery energy storage system law. They've consulted with fire chiefs. They've reviewed the NYSERDA battery energy storage system fire safety webinar. So they're really striving to do their homework on this and come up with a very informed law. But my understanding is that it's still in the drafting stage.
Great. We'll have someone come over and show me how to keep my AAAs separated from my AAs. Okay. I have to say I enjoy my own humor tremendously. No one else does. Anyway, moving along. I think we have finished for this evening. It's
Jane had a
9:15.
question.
Can I
And
just
no,
add
there's
one
something
thing,
else.
Jean, that
Sure.
I forgot to add at the very beginning? It was called to my attention by the town clerk this week that the town officials and volunteers on committees are
right.
required by state regulations to undergo diversity and sensitivity training, and now's the time. So I'm hopeful that the members of the commission might be willing to do that as well, and we'll just send you the information.
Yeah,
Details
my
watching.
memory is it's about an hour. The last one I
At
went
most.
to is about an hour on sexual harassment mostly.
Probably at
and-
most.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
not a very long thing.
Right.
Okay, yes, so we will please have that sent to all of us, and we will all be good doobies and do that. Thank you. Okay, with that, would anyone like to call to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
We are adjourning. Goodbye, everyone. I will see you in 2 weeks. No,
Thanks, everybody.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.